In person from Little Rock, a public service program of the UALR School of Mass Communication. You'll be hearing from internationally known speakers who have participated in recent Little Rock forums focusing on a variety of critical and compelling issues.
This is what we term the Ambassador's Dialogue. It is unique in the State Department. It is unique in the Foreign Service, where we pair an ambassador to the United States with his counterpart, the ambassador to his home country. And in this case, we have Ambassador Tai-sik, who is the ambassador from the Republic of Korea to the United States, with Ambassador Alexander Vershbow, who is our United States ambassador to the Republic of Korea in Seoul. This is their third time traveling together throughout the United States. We pick a series of cities in consultation with them, and we bring them, as we're doing tonight, to audiences throughout the United States and allow them to talk about the U.S.-ROK relationship and those critical events and issues that are facing our alliance. And I think you're going to be very pleased with this message that you hear tonight from them. So you will get a perspective from a Korean point of view and a U.S. point of view, and you will be, as I am, very greatly encouraged by the commonality of the position that they hold on a number of issues. So leading off this evening's discussion, I'm going to ask Ambassador Tai-sik to come up here. But let me tell you a little bit about him. It is indeed an honor to have him in Washington. He is one of the most experienced and senior diplomats of his country. We in the United States are privileged and honored to have him serving in Washington. I get to see him on a regular basis, and that is to my great benefit and education of that. But Ambassador Lee has had a career that began in the early 70s, so he is now in his fourth decade of service to his country. Some of the key assignments, as an example, he has been Deputy Foreign Minister. He has been Vice Foreign Minister. He was the ambassador to Israel in the year 2000. He was ambassador to the United Kingdom, the Court of St. James. And, of course, being named the ambassador to the United States is indeed a very high privilege. He comes to us with really no peer in the Foreign Service. And so without any further ado, I would like to ask you to welcome Ambassador Lee, and he'll start off our program.
Early this morning, or late this morning, we arrived here in Arkansas, and we had a tour of the library. It impressed me very much because we have visited other presidential library, but there we have seen the history written on the paper or history on the record. But here, what we have noticed was the live history. That history was something like taking place in actuality at this very moment. That was very live, that was very actual, that was very impressive. So it was a difference from other presidential library that we have visited in the past several days. So it impressed me a lot. Anyhow, I thank you very much for your hospitality and your keen interest in our two countries' relationship. The Clinton School's mission to promote a vision of world leaders who work with others to build healthy, engaged, and vibrant community is certainly laudable and appropriate. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk with people, young and old, who are interested in public service. Having spent the past 35 years of my own life as a public servant, I can tell you that it has not always been easy, but it has certainly been a worthwhile and rewarding career path. My topic for discussion today is the Korea-US alliance, one of the most successful alliances in history. And in particular, I like to discuss how our overall relationship has developed in the past 5 decades or so, and what has been our most serious challenges, and what is our most treasured opportunity, and how we are going to do about it. It is especially fitting that we discuss the Korea-US alliance here in Little Rock. As you know, this is the birthplace of General Douglas MacArthur, one of the forefathers of our alliance and a great hero of the Korean War. His leadership of the United Nations command forces defending South Korea during the Korean War forced North Korea to retreat, preventing the communist forces from taking over our entire nation. Thanks to General MacArthur's service, along with the sacrifices of so many courageous young American soldiers, today generations of South Koreans live and breathe in freedom and democracy. In the decades after the war, the Korea-US alliance has successfully played a pivotal role in maintaining peace and security in Northeast Asian region. Thanks to this unique alliance partnership, Korea has been able to rise from the ashes of war to become the 11th largest economy in the world. At the same time, Korea has become a fully mature democracy. These two unique achievements are the envy of the international community. And on this, we owe you a lot. The Korean people today are well aware and immensely grateful for the fact that these two twin achievements were possible, thanks in no small part to the United States. Looking beyond the Korean Peninsula, globalization has brought about dramatic changes in the international sphere. In the midst of this global transformation, Korea itself has seen dramatic changes, politically, economically, and socially. Therefore, it follows that we would also modernize our alliance to adapt to the new strategic environment. This is why, during the past few years, Korea and the US have closely worked together to come to a series of agreements to update our partnership. For example, Korea and the US saw eye to eye on the concept of strategic flexibility in the military realm. We are implementing agreements to realign and relocate US forces in Korea. We also successfully agreed on a plan to transfer wartime operational control to the now capable Korean military with the target year of 2012, and the list goes on and on. These steps are aimed at transforming the alliance created during the Cold War into a more dynamic and proactive relationship that reflects Korea's enhanced economic and military capability and the ever-changing international strategic environment. Not only will our new alliance maintain peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and in the region, it can also play its part in maintaining peace and security in the world at large. Throughout the years, the strengthening of the Korea-US relationship has been and will remain as a priority for the Korean government. As a matter of fact, our President-elect Lee Myung-bak announced as a part of his campaign plans a 7-point guideline for his foreign policy, as he emphasized bolstering the Korea-US alliance is the essential and the single most important component. This so-called MB doctrine, after the initials of his first name, emphasized, and I quote, strengthening of the ROK-US alliance to protect and promote mutual interest based on the shared values of democracy and market economy. And I unquote. He made it very clear that the Korea-US relationship is the backbone of Korea's foreign policy. Last week, President-elect Lee's special envoy visited Washington to convey to President Bush and other key leaders the new administration's strong commitment to enhancing our alliance. And President-elect Lee himself will visit the U.S. this spring at the invitation of President Bush. Therefore, we can be assured of the highest levels of cooperation and friendship in our bilateral partnership. I can say for sure that our bilateral ties will be secure in the future as it has been strong and firm so far. Looking ahead, one thing that hasn't yet changed, the biggest security threat to the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia remains the same North Korean problem, and this time North Korea's nuclear problem. This matter first surfaced prior to and during President Clinton's administration, which, following the time-consuming and nerve-wracking negotiations with North Korea, was able to avert a crisis and forged the so-called Agreed Framework of 1994. This agreed framework was perceived as a moment of great success to address the problem and laid out a vision for denuclearized North Korea. Korea-US cooperation on North Korea was further reinforced by two important developments. First, North Korea's Marshal Jo Myung-nok came to Washington sometimes October year 2000, which was followed by Secretary of State Madeleine Albright's visit to North Korea sometimes in December that same year. There was an anticipation of the visit to be made by President Clinton, but it did not materialize. Perhaps it was too big, too late for the president to take an uncertain venture at that moment. Overall, during President Clinton's presidency, Korea-US relations were characterized by a sense of urgency and a common desire to resolve the single most important security issue involving North Korea's nuclear problem through diplomatic means. And in Korea, we remember him as a close friend and pay tribute to his hard work on this. Today, we continue to pursue a diplomatic path with the aim of resolving the same North Korea's nuclear problem, finally and fully. In this effort, Korea and the US, together with China, Japan, and Russia, are working day and night through a process known as the six-party talks. After a series of ups and downs during the past few years, last year we were again successful in concluding two very important agreements. These agreements were specific action plans to implement the overarching agreement concluded back in September year 2005, when North Korea committed itself to abandoning all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. In return, the international community pledged to take corresponding diplomatic and economic measures with other actions pending the permanent peace structure to be taken in due course. In accordance with these two action plans, North Korea has shut down its nuclear facilities in Yangbyon, and we are now in the process of disabling them. The North also agreed to provide a complete and correct declaration of all its nuclear programs, including nuclear activities, facilities, and materials by the last day of 2007. The country has yet to fulfill this obligation, and this is why the six-party talks are currently at the standstill. As we know from past experience, negotiations to resolve nuclear threat with North Korea have never been smooth and have always been time-consuming and frustrating at some point. Therefore, we need to be equipped with additional amount of patience, stay the course to achieve our desired objective. Although progress is slow at the moment, Korea and U.S., together with other members of six-party talks, need to maintain the commitment and determination to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. I am certain that we will see steady progress toward our goal. This is our biggest challenge. And now I'd like to turn to our biggest opportunity, which is in the economic realm. In 1961, the Republic of Korea, with a per capita income of less than $100, was among the poorest nations on earth, ranking 101st out of 125 countries. Today, some 50 years later, Korea boasts a powerful economy with a per capita income of $20,000, first in the world in shipbuilding, LCD, and semiconductors. Against this backdrop of successful economic development, Korea-U.S. economic relations have also changed dramatically. From a recipient of U.S. assistance following the war through the trade frictions of the 1980s and 90s, our economic relationship has grown more reciprocal and mature. Korea-U.S. trade last year surpassed $80 billion, with Korea as the United States' seventh largest trading partner, ahead of France, Spain, and India. Investment is also becoming a two-way street, as last year, U.S. companies invested $2.3 billion in Korea, while Korean investment in the U.S. totaled $2 billion. As our two nations' economies have become increasingly compatible and intertwined, we decided it was time to streamline things and pursue a free trade agreement. In fact, as a way to further fuel our economic growth engine, Korea has undertaken a series of FTA negotiations. With several already completed, we are close to concluding another with ASEAN, while negotiating additional agreements with major economies like the EU, India, and Canada. However, an FTA which the United States is of highest importance and priority. The Chorus FTA, as we call it, would allow Korea greater access to the world's largest market and upgrade our economy to a more knowledge and service-based economy, thus enhancing Korea's competitiveness and attracting additional foreign investment. For the United States, the U.S. International Trade Commission predicts that through this FTA, the economy will see a $10 to $12 billion boost. As President Bush noted in his State of the Union address, he urged the passage of the agreement last night by saying that trade brings better jobs, better choices, and better prices. It's a very correct statement. Further, as the United States' first FTA in Northeast Asia, the Chorus FTA links the U.S. economy with one of the most vibrant economies in the world and can serve as a springboard to further promote trade in the region and beyond. Again, as President Bush said last night, these FTAs also promote America's strategic interest. It is particularly so when it comes to Korea-US Free Trade Agreement. Let me briefly describe some key features of this free trade agreement. First, it is big. With the combined value of our two economies exceeding $14 trillion, this agreement is the most commercially significant for the United States in more than a decade. In comparison to the United States' other current FTAs, namely with Colombia, Panama, and Peru, Korea's GDP of $900 billion is more than 3.5 times bigger than that of those three countries combined. Further, Korea's bilateral trade volume, which the United States, which stands at $80 billion annually, is nearly 3 times as large as these three countries' trade with the United States combined. Second, the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement is a comprehensive. It covers the full range of trade-related areas from agriculture to goods and services to the state-of-the-art areas of intellectual property, e-commerce, competition, labor, and environment. Finally, this is a high-quality FTA. Tariffs on nearly 95% of all goods will be eliminated within 3 years. In addition, almost 2/3 of U.S. agricultural exports worth more than $2 billion will become duty-free immediately. Korea is Arkansas's 8th largest export market for industrial goods. Under this FTA, Arkansas's leading exports to Korea of chemical manufacturers, processed foods, transportation equipment, computers and electronics, and even electrical equipment, all will enjoy expanded market opportunities. And Arkansas's farmers and ranchers stand to reap some of the biggest gains. Key Arkansas agricultural exports, including poultry, soybeans, and cotton, will benefit from the immediate elimination of tariffs. This FTA will also eliminate 100% of tariffs on industrial, forestry, and maritime products. In short, Korea-US Free Trade Agreement is a rare opportunity and a win-win situation for both our countries and economies. But the difficult process of legislative approval from both sides lies ahead. In Korea, the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement bill was submitted to the National Assembly last September. Our upcoming parliamentary general election in April this year makes it hard to predict when the FTA might be considered. But it is expected to be ratified sooner than later because public opinion is growing more in favor of this agreement. In the case of the United States, the situation remains more complicated as we face an uphill battle for approval in the Congress. The fact that this is an election year means that, practically speaking, the bill must be considered before summer. Meanwhile, in this unfavorable political environment, it is harder to get out the facts about sensitive trade issues like beef and autos. And yet, I won't dwell on the detailed aspect of beef and autos, but I can tell you one thing. As far as we are concerned, we are going to open our beef market rather sooner than later. And that will be the moment of truth that we can move forward on this ratification in the U.S. Congress. Overall, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce points out the cost of inaction on the FTA. And let me quote, U.S. business and farmers would not only lose new access to the Korean market, but also could lose market share as Korea concludes other bilateral trade agreements with global competitors like the EU, Canada, and so forth. To elaborate on what a missed opportunity would mean, first, U.S. companies would lose market share in Korea because Korea's FTA negotiations with major economies like the EU and Canada are well underway. Second, the U.S. would lose a valuable geopolitical springboard in East Asia because the Quotas FTA is the only FTA U.S. has in this dynamic region so far. Finally, it would also shake a trading partner's trust in U.S. policy while signaling rising protectionism in the U.S. Therefore, at this important juncture, we would certainly welcome your support for early passage of this landmark bill. In fact, you have probably noticed that a big theme on the campaign trail these days is change. Well, let me suggest this positive and powerful change that will boost business and directly improve the everyday lives of both Koreans and Americans. And that is the ratification of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement in the first part of this year. And it was here that the catchphrase of "its economy is stupid" was created. In sum, I'm confident that Korea-U.S. partnership will continue to remain firm and strong. I believe our shared history and common goals will enable us to stand together to meet any challenges we may face in the future. And therefore, I can tell you once again that we owe you a lot to make Korea such a successful economy and such a successful democracy. And together we have achieved this goal, and together we will encounter whatever challenges that might lie ahead in our path. Thank you very much.
When I was going to college, I was privileged to take a class from Walter P. Dowling, and I thought at the time that he was very remarkable, having been an ambassador to Germany and an ambassador to Korea. And I don't think very few people have ever broached that part east and west. But tonight we have a very special person indeed who has done that. And let me tell you a little bit about Sandy Vershbow. He is a treasurer within the State Department. So for those students in the audience who have any inkling for public service in the State Department and the Foreign Service, grab his ear, talk to him, and he will be happy to tell you. And if not to tell you, then look up online somewhere, perhaps on the U.S. Embassy website in Seoul, to get a fuller detail on his biography. But just let me give you a sample of what you're going to see tonight. Just several years ago, when I first heard of Sandy Vershbow, he was the special assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and Senior Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council under President Clinton. From there, he was the U.S. ambassador to NATO. That's pretty impressive in itself. But as a Russian specialist, he then went on for 4 years as our ambassador to the Russian Federation. And if that wasn't enough, he was asked to switch gears entirely and to move to Asia. And he and his wife picked up and did that. And since October of 2005, he has been a marvelous representative of the U.S. in Korea as our ambassador there. And so without me talking more about him, let's hear from Sandy Vershbow.
I'm very pleased to be at this venue because Ambassador Lee and I both have devoted our entire professional lives to public service. And I'm very excited to see that this new school devoted to public service is already thriving. And I'm very glad to see how it's already preparing young people to go out there and change their communities, change their societies, and change the world. The Republic of Korea has been one of our best partners in helping to make the world a better place. But I think our relationship doesn't always get the attention or the appreciation that it deserves. So I'm very happy to give my perspective to complement that of Ambassador Lee. Well, let me give you sort of a feeling about Korea. My wife, Lisa, who's here tonight and who had a very lively meeting herself with the students of the Clinton School this afternoon. She's taught me a lot about Korean art during our time in Seoul. And there's an artist named Paek Nam-joon, or he's known as Nam-joon Paek here in the United States. He died a couple of years ago. He spent most of his professional life here in America, but he's perhaps the most famous Korean-born modern artist. And he once said something that very succinctly encapsulates the state of affairs in Korea and in our bilateral relationship. He said, "The future is now." And I think nowhere on earth does the present appear to intersect with the future more than in the Republic of Korea. If any of you have had the pleasure of visiting Seoul, you understand what I'm talking about, because the city really throbs with activity 24 hours a day. High above the streets, there are dozens of giant TV screens that are beaming images that bounce against the glass and the polished steel of ultra-modern buildings, while down below, neon signs line the street and cast shadows off of the crowds of the busy city dwellers who are not only talking but texting and even watching TV on the latest cell phone technology. But at the same time, the landscape is punctuated by beautiful reminders of Korea's past. The traffic whizzes by day and night, the stone walls of centuries-old palaces, and under the gracefully sloping tile roofs of ancient gates and pagodas. I was pleased to see you have a small model of a Korean traditional gate over near the river here in Little Rock. But I think Seoul is really an amazing mixture of old and new. And some visitors say that they find Seoul more evocative of the set of a science fiction movie than any other city that they've ever visited. So I think if you spend a single day in Seoul, you realize that Paek Nam-joon was onto something. In Korea, the future is taking shape now, and this is true in the political life of the country as well. As you just heard, the Koreans had an election, may not be getting as much attention as ours, but on December 19th, they elected the former mayor of Seoul, Lee Myung-bak, to be the next president of South Korea, and he'll take office on February 25th for a 5-year term. It's important to remember that Korea has only been having real democratic elections for 20 years. And so the respect for the rule of law and the transparency with which the election was conducted is a real testament to Korea's commitment to democracy and the speed with which it has developed one of the most impressive multi-party democratic systems in the world. Now, there were some allegations of scandals and a little bit of negative campaigning, which one never sees here, which threatened to shift the focus a little bit away from policy issues. But in the end, the Korean people elected Mr. Lee by an overwhelming margin. It was the largest in Korean history. He got almost double the votes of his nearest competitor in a 10-candidate field. And they voted for him on the basis of his vision for the future of Korea and on his pledges to revitalize the economy, boost economic growth, and create more opportunity for Korean citizens. So Koreans definitely voted for change. And I think it's also important from our point of view that President-elect Lee has emphasized his interest not only in revitalizing South Korea's economy, but in revitalizing Korea's relationship with the United States. He's also stressed the importance of the complete denuclearization of North Korea, and he's even offered a detailed plan to triple North Koreans' per capita income to $3,000 a year, provided that denuclearization is completed. So on these and many other issues, such as our important Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, we look forward to working closely with President-elect Lee's government. Now, as South Korea makes the transition to a new government, some commentators have suggested that over the last 10 years, a growing distance has developed between the United States and Korea. But I don't see it that way. And it's true that we've sometimes had differences on certain issues, but having served as ambassador for more than 2 years now, I think it's striking just how resilient our relationship has been and how much our two governments have accomplished together. Moreover, the ties between our peoples are stronger than ever, as evidenced by the nearly 500,000 visas that our embassy issues each year. Many of them used multiple times, and the 100,000 Korean students that are studying at U.S. universities and high schools. So I think many of the goals our two countries have been pursuing together for years, peace on the Korean Peninsula, a more mature and balanced military partnership, and tariff-free trade, are now within reach. So with that introduction, let me comment in a little more detail about a few of the key issues in the relationship and what we might be seeing in the coming years. I'll start with the US-ROK military alliance, which has traditionally been the central pillar of our relationship. And while the security environment in Northeast Asia has been changing rapidly, our military alliance has been a reassuring constant. It's matured a lot over its 55-year history in order to adapt to changing circumstances. But our commitment to each other's security remains as strong now as it was when we signed our mutual defense treaty in 1953 at the end of the Korean War. This mutual commitment is the firm foundation on which our long-standing friendship has developed. From the Korean War to Vietnam to the current fight for democracy in Iraq and Afghanistan, South Korean troops have been there for us. They've stood shoulder to shoulder with U.S. forces for more than half a century. And the bonds that we've forged really transcend wartime allegiances. I was proud to see our two Coast Guards working together just a few weeks ago to discuss how to best contain and clean up a tragic oil spill that hit Korea's west coast. And dozens of American servicemen and women joined thousands of Korean volunteers to help clean up the beaches, literally cleaning each rock one by one, inch by inch. Now, there are two innovative new measures that are going to take our bilateral security partnership to a new level. First, our two militaries have developed and already started to implement a comprehensive 5-year plan to transfer wartime operational control from today's Combined Forces Command, which is headed by an American general, to Korea's own military in April 2012. This transfer reflects the impressive development of Korea's armed forces and its own military capabilities, and it's really the logical next step in the evolution of our alliance. I think it makes sense for Korea to take primary responsibility for its own defense, but with U.S. forces still standing by on and off the peninsula to support their Korean allies under any scenario. So we're now working to carry out this plan and ensure that there's a seamless transition that provides everything needed to deter aggression and maintain the peace for the long haul. Now, the second part of our alliance transformation is the realignment of American forces that's been taking place on the peninsula, the biggest realignment in the alliance's history. This involves the closure of nearly 100 bases and camps along the northern part of the country, including our very large main headquarters in downtown Seoul, and consolidating these units into 3 key hubs south of the capital. This is going to streamline and modernize our operational capabilities while also lowering our visibility, lowering our profile by getting our headquarters out of Korea's capital, which is long overdue. But none of these changes signal a change in the U.S. commitment to the defense of Korea. I think they're going to make the alliance even stronger than it is today and better able to meet tomorrow's security challenges. Now, this doesn't mean that the alliance won't require constant maintenance, and I think that the 55 years of working together have taught us that change is going to be a constant factor in Northeast Asia. And in fact, in the years ahead, I think we need to explore how to make our alliance more global in its mission, building on Korea's growing involvement in the promotion of democracy and the fight against terrorism beyond the Korean Peninsula. The incoming administration of President-elect Lee has expressed interest in developing the global dimension of our alliance, giving not only updating its mission on the peninsula, but adding to its functions in Northeast Asia and around the world. Now, the biggest security challenge that our alliance must deal with now, as Ambassador Lee explained, is North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons. We've made important progress in the six-party talks over the past year. North Korea's nuclear reactor facility at Yongbyon is no longer producing plutonium, and teams of U.S. experts are actually staying in Yongbyon to carry out the disablement of these facilities, and that's progressing pretty well. That's the good news. The bad news is that the North Koreans have not yet honored their commitment to fully declare all of their nuclear programs and activities. And this declaration is important because it's the basis for full denuclearization, the to-do list for the abandonment of all of North Korea's nuclear weapons and programs, as was agreed by the six parties back in September 2005. So when Pyongyang submits a complete and correct declaration, the United States is prepared to take steps toward a more normal relationship with North Korea, starting with the removal of North Korea from the state sponsors of terrorism list and the jurisdiction of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Secretary Rice just reaffirmed we're prepared to do our part if North Korea does its part. But the most important thing is that submitting a complete declaration would allow us to turn to the crucial final phase of the six-party process, when North Korea is expected to fully abandon its nuclear weapons and programs. It's important to remember what North Korea would gain from full denuclearization. All kinds of far-reaching changes become possible when it abandons its nuclear ambitions for good. First, President Bush has made clear we're ready to establish normal diplomatic relations and open embassies in Washington and Pyongyang as soon as North Korea denuclearizes. Second, we'd be ready to formally end the Korean War and establish a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula to replace the armistice of 1953, which was supposed to be temporary, but is still the tenuous basis for the cessation of hostilities on the peninsula. Third, South Korea, the United States, and other countries would be prepared to provide North Korea with the development capital and assistance that the country desperately needs to modernize its backward economy and improve the lives of its people. And fourth, with North Korea becoming a responsible member of the international community by getting rid of its nukes, we could transform Northeast Asia, opening up new transportation corridors and markets, as well as new possibilities for regional cooperation and integration, similar to what we've seen in Europe since the end of the Cold War. So there's a very positive future out there, but we cannot get ahead of ourselves, because North Korea still has to make the strategic decision to denuclearize so that it can join the international community. We remain hopeful that we can get the process back on track and even complete the project this year. President Bush would like to do this before he leaves office, but will take as long as it requires, and we're not going to settle for a partial solution that leaves North Korea with even a few of its nuclear weapons and its nuclear material. Now, security issues have been the focal point of our relationship for the last half-century, but trade and investment are beginning to occupy center stage. And indeed, in the last few years, we've seen a dramatic transformation in our bilateral economic relationship. More than any other country in Asia, I would submit, Korea has opened itself up to foreign trade and investment, and it's tried to implement economic regulation based on global best practices. And this has, as Ambassador Lee said, led to much greater reciprocity, much greater balance in our economic relationship. Now, in order to further deepen this relationship and create more economic opportunity in both countries, our governments decided in early 2006, after extensive consultations with the private sector, to launch free trade agreement negotiations. People thought we would never get it done, but we defied the skeptics, and on June 30th of last year, we signed the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which we call, for short, the KORUS FTA. It is a huge deal, the largest FTA the United States has negotiated since NAFTA, and the biggest FTA Korea has ever negotiated. It will remove virtually all the barriers to trade and investment between our two countries. 95% of the tariffs will be zeroed out within the first 3 years. So the benefits will be tremendous as well. For American exporters, the opening of Korea's protected agricultural sector will lead to billions of dollars in increased sales, and the deregulation of Korea's underdeveloped services sector, financial services, professional services like lawyers and accountants, broadcasting and media, all of this will create huge new opportunities as well. Our manufacturers will also benefit, whether it be sales of industrial equipment, chemical products, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, or technology. Korea is already a big market, and the FTA will give our exporters much better access than other countries have. As the Ambassador mentioned, our bipartisan International Trade Commission, in its report to Congress last fall, concluded that the KORUS FTA will boost our gross domestic product by $10 to $12 billion a year, and that it will boost exports by at least $10 billion a year, and perhaps by 50% over the longer term. So this is by far the biggest benefit of any FTA we've negotiated in the last 5 years. For Korea, the benefits will also be huge, but a little different. Since Korean products already have excellent access to the U.S. market, while they will get some additional tariff benefits, the main benefits for Korea will be to their domestic economy by deregulating it, making it more investor-friendly, and making it more competitive vis-a-vis Korea's neighbors. And I think for both of our countries, the FTA will have spillover benefits throughout the Northeast Asia region, as it makes other countries like Japan and China think about what policies they need to put into place if they want to enjoy similar FTA treatment and avoid falling behind. So it all sounds great, but it's not yet in effect, because we need to have the agreement ratified by the legislatures of both countries. The situation, as the Ambassador said, looks pretty bright in Korea. Public support for the agreement is 65 to 70%, according to the polls. And it may take till after the parliamentary elections in April, but I'm pretty confident that the Korean government will do its part to get the agreement ratified. The road ahead in the Congress is much more difficult. This is partly a reflection of the different place we're in the public debate in this country. Koreans have been debating the FTA almost from the day the subject was first broached several years ago. And after some initial opposition and even some protests in the streets, the Korean people have come to understand that the overall impact of the FTA will be hugely beneficial to both sides. In the United States, we started the public debate much later, probably didn't really start until after the agreement was signed last June. So far, the FTA has really been defined by its opponents, and especially those in the automobile industry. And I have to say that's a real disappointment, because the automobile provisions are among the strongest parts of the FTA, and they'll do a lot to resolve all of the issues that U.S. car makers have said make it hard for them to export to Korea. So it was very important that President Bush did underscore his commitment to ratifying the KORUS FTA, as well as our FTAs with Colombia and Panama. And he made a very basic point that we owe it to our workers to open up additional export markets for American goods and services. More exports means more jobs. The ITC study, as I mentioned, predicted that exports could rise by $10 billion a year. That could translate into several hundred thousand new jobs. So I know trade is a controversial issue, but this agreement is definitely a winner. And it's important also to think about the opposite scenario. What would happen if Congress were swayed by the opponents and decided not to ratify this agreement? I really think the consequences would be very dire. Our businesses, our workers, and our farmers would miss out on billions of dollars of economic benefits. But failure to ratify the FTA would have a much broader impact on whether countries around the world would view us as a credible negotiating partner. We could be relegated to the sidelines as other competitors continue to negotiate trade deals without us. Moreover, failure to ratify the FTA would send a message to our longtime allies, the Koreans, that we're not the reliable partners that they thought we were. Strategically, some people could see rejection of the FTA as a sign of U.S. disengagement from Northeast Asia, and that could lead to the emergence of new exclusive trading arrangements that left the United States out. So I think for all these reasons, rejecting the FTA is a strategic mistake that we cannot afford to make. But I do think that once people begin to understand the benefits of this FTA and realize that they're really so dramatic, and also when they understand the grave consequences of not ratifying the agreement, I'm confident that Americans' support for this agreement will grow. But this does require that people who support the U.S.-Korea relationship to speak out in favor of the FTA and help shape the public debate. The business community, of course, as the large stakeholder, has to speak out, but I think people from the academic world, people interested in public policy in whatever walk of life you work in, need to make both the economic case and the strategic case known. So I hope you'll participate in this debate. We certainly don't want the debate dominated by a few opponents who would have us pass up this extraordinary opportunity. So I'll conclude there, but let me just add a couple of words about an issue that is perhaps the most important issue for the average Korean citizen, and that's getting Korea into the United States visa waiver program. Last year, President Bush signed into law a bill that lays the groundwork for full Korean participation in the program. Under the new law, if the Korean government works with us to put into place a series of security measures that help strengthen safety and security of international travel, Korean citizens will be able to travel visa-free for visits of up to 90 days. And no one more than me would like to see the giant lines that circle around our embassy for visa applicants, see those lines disappear. We're making progress in putting these security enhancements in place, but much work remains to be done. For example, we have to develop an electronic travel authorization system that allows us to screen travelers before they depart Korea, and the Korean side has to introduce a new e-passport that has a chip with biometric information inside. But I think this, our countries are working closely, and by this time next year, the visa waiver program should become a reality for Korea. So let me come back to what Paek Nam-jun said about the future is now. Thanks to our close friendship, Korea and the United States may soon realize many of our shared aspirations, including the denuclearization of North Korea, a more balanced and mature military partnership, increased trade and investment, and visa-free travel that can bring our peoples even closer together. Together, we're leading our alliance into the future stronger, healthier, and more resilient than ever before. For Korea and the United States, the future is now, and it looks pretty good. Thank you very much.
This has been In Person from Little Rock, a public service program produced by the UALR School of Mass Communication.